Three girls stood on the chapel steps in white dresses that didn't fit. The fabric hung off their small frames like borrowed ghosts' sleeves, two long lace-torn hems soaked in desert dust. No one smiled. No music played. The air hung dry and sharp, the sun pressing down like punishment. From across the empty street, Eloise Mercer pulled her horse to a slow stop. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed on the scene ahead. A man, tall, sweating, and smug, counted coins in his palm, then nodded to three older men lined up like buyers at a cattle auction. His voice rang across the hot silence. "Come on now, girls. Time to meet your husbands. Mind your tears. Ain't nobody paying for drama." Inside that chapel, someone cried out a girl's voice, high and raw. Then another. Then another. It wasn't the sound of celebration. It was the sound of surrender. Eloise dismounted, her boots crunching over sun-baked dirt. She didn't ask why she was here. Didn't need to. She just knew. She had seen dresses like those before, had heard sobs like that in a fevered dream 5 years ago. And she remembered standing too far away. Too late. As a wooden box was lowered into the earth, she walked forward, each step heavier than the last. The girls were barely more than children. The oldest held the hands of her younger sisters, eyes wide and hollow. One of the men, slick-haired with tobacco-stained teeth, licked his lips. And then the father spoke again. "Your lucky men want you. Be grateful. Smile pretty." That's when Eloise stepped into the light, into their story. And without raising her voice, she said, "Funny kind of wedding this is. Most brides I've seen choose their own grooms." Silence fell. The girls turned. The father turned. And three men shifted uneasily, their hands brushing close to their belts. Eloise Mercer didn't flinch. She'd already buried one daughter. She wasn't about to watch three more get sold. The girls didn't know her name, but Eloise Mercer knew theirs before they ever spoke a word. The eldest, Clara, had that rigid posture only grief could carve into a child. Her arms were outstretched, shielding the others. Her jaw clenched, but her hands trembled. The middle girl, Josie, maybe 13, kept her eyes low, staring at her shoes, like if she stayed small enough, the world would forget she existed. And the youngest, Lila, stood frozen. Her white dress drooped like a curtain over bruised knees, and a faint line of dried blood marked her temple. Three girls, three children, and one man they called Papa, Royce Hanley, the kind of man who wore a good vest and bad intentions. His hair was slicked with oil, and the gold watch chain across his chest shone brighter than any decency in his heart. He barked at the girls again, louder this time. "Stand up straight, Clara. You're making them look weak." Eloise didn't speak, not yet. Instead, she watched, because once 5 years ago, she hadn't watched closely enough. Her daughter May had taken ill on a warm September morning. By sunset, she was gone. The doctor had called it fever, but Eloise always wondered if it had been loneliness, the kind that festers when your mama works the land and your daddy drinks through grief. Eloise had been too late then, too caught up in her own hollowing. And May had gone into the ground without ever knowing just how much her mother loved her. After the burial, Eloise Mercer packed a satchel and left the ranch behind. She rode out under a sky too big for forgiveness and never looked back, until 2 weeks ago. She'd heard stories whispered along the trail of a town out west where little girls were being married off to strangers. The law didn't look too close, and the preachers blessed what coin provided. She hadn't planned to come, but the voice in her chest, the one that had once belonged to May, wouldn't stop whispering. "You have a chance to do it right, Mama. Just once." So here she was standing in the open, watching men barter for children like they were sacks of flour. Her hand drifted to her saddlebag where a worn journal sat next to a revolver. The revolver was for emergencies. The journal was for truth. And if neither worked, she figured her bones could still make a decent shield. Royce turned toward her now, eyes narrowing. This ain't your concern, ma'am. These girls are mine. Eloise looked at Clara, at Josie, at Lila. And for just a breath, she saw May in each of them. Not the sick girl in bed, but the laughing one, barefoot in spring mud, braiding daisies into her mama's hair. Eloise stepped forward again, boots crunching against sun-baked earth. They're not yours, she said. They're not property, and they're not for sale. Royce Hanley laughed. Not a joyful sound, more like a dog growling over its dinner. Lady, you don't get to walk into my town and tell me how to raise my girls. He waved a lazy hand toward the three men standing nearby. These gentlemen came a long way and paid good coin. That means they leave here with wives. One apiece, that's the arrangement. The tallest of the men stepped forward. A rail-thin man with gray whiskers and teeth stained dark from chewing tobacco. He tipped his hat mockingly. Name's Luther Briggs. That little one there's mine. Paid $50 fare. He pointed at Lila, who recoiled behind her sisters. Eloise's eyes narrowed. She reached slowly into her saddlebag, pulled out a soft leather pouch, and tossed it to the dirt at Luther's feet. There's $100 in there. Double what you paid. She's coming with me. Royce bent down and scooped up the pouch before Luther could move. He weighed it in his hand coins, clinking softly. Generous, Royce said. But you don't get to change the rules. This ain't a general store. These marriages are binding. Eloise tilted her head. Marriages. She let the word hang in the air, like something rotting. Don't need no preacher or paper when the girls never had a say. From behind, Royce, a man in black, stepped forward clean-shaven with a Bible tucked under one arm. They gave consent, ma'am, he said smoothly. Their Father speaks for them, and I bear witness. The Lord sees no fault in wives being chosen by righteous men. Eloise looked him over. You a preacher? He smiled thinly. Deacon Samuel Moyer. I serve the traveling missions across this territory. Another vulture, but one dressed in scripture and ceremony. The tension crackled like dry wood before a fire. Clara stood straighter, her eyes pleading but resolute. Please, she whispered. Don't let him take Lila. She's just a child. And that was all it took. Eloise took one step forward and drew back her coat just enough to show the revolver at her side. Her hand rested near it, not grabbing, just reminding. You ever seen a child hold her sister's hand in a coffin? She asked softly. Because I have. And I swear to every star in this sky, I won't see it happen again. Luther's hand twitched near his belt. Eloise didn't blink. Her voice dropped to a whisper that still cut like steel. Try it. See if you're faster than regret. Luther stepped back, but Royce was unfazed. You threatening folks now, that gun don't make you law. Eloise reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. She held it up dusk, catching the edge of it in the sunlight. Territorial Marshal's Commission, she said. Been authorized 3 years. A lie. It was a land deed. But the seal looked official, and none of these men had eyes sharp enough to tell under this heat. Royce narrowed his eyes. You bluffin'. Eloise took another step. Maybe. Maybe not. But I'll tell you what's real. Forcing girls into marriage without consent is a federal offense. That makes you a trafficker. And that makes me real interested in how a poor farmer like you's wearing a gold watch and silk socks, one of the other suitors muttered. The deacon shifted uneasily. The threat was working. But Eloise knew something else too, that fear only lasts so long. She glanced toward the hills. A trick of sunlight caught on something, maybe a broken bottle, maybe a coin. But she nodded toward it anyway. See that glint, she said calmly. That's Marshal Whitaker. Rifle trained on this very square. You boys still want to play brave. She held their gaze. All of them. She didn't know if they'd call her bluff, But she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't leaving this town without those girls. The silence stretched like wire between loaded guns. For a breath, it seemed the bluff might hold. Royce Hanley's eyes flicked toward the ridge where the sunlight had caught metal, maybe a rifle, maybe not. The other men shifted, uncertain. Even the preacher took a cautious step back, thumbing the edge of his Bible like it might shield him from bullets. Then came the clatter of hooves. From the east end of town, a single rider approached, fast, steady, determined. Eloise's heart stuttered. Was it real backup or another enemy? As the dust cleared, the man dismounted. He was tall, built like a pine trunk, with a long coat and a limp that dragged behind him like a ghost. When he stepped forward, the crowd parted without a word. Eloise's breath caught. Deputy Bram Collins, alive. The man she'd heard rumors about, the one said to be gunned down in the Cimarron Canyon ambush nearly 2 years ago. But there he stood, arm in a sling scar along his cheek, like a thunderbolt struck his face and left it burning. He didn't waste time. "Eloise Mercer," he said with a nod. "Took you long enough." Then he turned to the crowd. "These girls are not brides. They are victims. And I've got a case that names every one of you standing here." The preacher turned pale. One of the grooms cursed and backed away. Royce barked a laugh. "You think you can just show up, flash a badge, and shut this down?" Collins held up a worn ledger. "This book has bank records, money funneled through false churches, ranches that don't exist, and a certain sheriff's office out of Wellspring." He turned to the preacher. "Reverend Moyer, your name's on 6 marriage ledgers, all girls under 16. None of them ever showed up in census records afterward." Eloise stepped beside him, holding up the journal from her saddlebag. "My late husband worked for the governor's office. He kept notes, saw reports about Sweetwater County underage marriages, missing girls. Nothing ever came of it." She flipped to a page. "September 15th. Deputy Marshal Bram Collins filed a report. Went missing a week later." The air thickened. "That report was buried." Royce said, voice low and tight. "We paid good money, too." He stopped himself. But Collins had already stepped closer. "You paid who, Royce Sheriff?" And that's when the town's new arrival appeared. From behind the church, a man stepped forward, Sheriff Merrick Callahan, wearing a polished badge, dark vest, and a smirk that had no place on a lawman's face. He surveyed the scene like a man inspecting his cattle. "Deputy Collins," he drawled. "I thought you were dead." "Almost." "Too bad," the sheriff muttered, stepping toward Eloise. "Lady, you've been impersonating an officer. That's a hanging offense." Eloise held her ground. "So is child trafficking." "But you'd know that, wouldn't you?" The crowd went still. A new kind of fear rippled across the grooms and Deacon Moyer. The tide was turning, but Callahan didn't flinch. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded telegram. "Funny thing this morning, I got word from the Territorial Marshal's office. Said they haven't issued any new commissions in over 6 months." He held up the note like a dagger. "Your little performance ends here, ma'am," Clara cried out. Josie pulled Lila behind her. Eloise's hand moved instinctively toward her holster, but Collins stopped her. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let him talk." Callahan smiled. "You think anyone here cares what happens to 3 ragged girls? You think anyone's gonna fight for them once you're gone?" But Eloise wasn't done. She stepped forward, voice low and deadly clear. "You know what the problem with rotted systems is, Sheriff? They forget paper burns. But stories travel. I've got copies of this journal stashed in 3 different towns. If I don't return by sundown tomorrow, they go straight to the capital." She stared straight into his eyes. "Your badge won't mean a thing when the truth gets out." The sheriff's face darkened. And for the first time, he looked worried. Behind him, the grooms began whispering. And that's when Clara stepped forward. "Deputy Collins," she said, her voice shaking. "You came here once before, 2 years ago. You spoke to my friend Sarah." Collins went still. "What happened to her?" Clara's eyes glistened. She vanished, after saying she had something to give you. My father told us to forget she ever existed. Josie added, whispering, she's buried behind the old mill. I saw him dig the hole. The final thread snapped. Eloise turned back to the sheriff. This isn't just corruption anymore, it's murder. Sheriff Callahan's hand drifted slowly toward his holster. You're both under arrest, he growled. Collins for interfering with territorial business and you, lady, for impersonating an officer and inciting a riot. Eloise didn't move. Neither did Deputy Collins. Clara, Josie, and Lila clung to each other, eyes darting between the men and the guns. Lila was crying now. Silently, her fingers clenched in her sister's skirts. Josie pressed a hand to her mouth to stop the sobs. Clara stayed standing, her spine trembling, but straight. I'm not going anywhere with them, she said softly. I'd rather die. That was when Royce snapped. You ruined everything, he shouted, lunging forward. His coat flared and something glinted in his hand. A derringer, tiny but deadly at this range. He grabbed Clara by the wrist, twisting her arm behind her back and shoving the gun to her neck. You want to talk about murder? Let's make it official. The square erupted in chaos. One of the grooms drew his weapon. Another fled toward the stable. The preacher fell to his knees, clutching his Bible as if it could stop bullets. Eloise's gun was out before Royce finished his threat, her aim locked on his chest. Let her go. But Royce tightened his grip. Clara gasped. One move, and she dies. Behind Eloise, Collins stepped sideways, trying to flank. But Callahan saw the motion and raised his gun toward him. Nobody moves, the sheriff barked. You think exposing us will stop this? We own this territory. You're a ghost, Collins. And this woman's just another forgotten widow. Eloise's heart pounded. Her hand was steady, but her mind screamed. If she fired, Clara might die. If she hesitated, they all might. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Lila moved. She slipped free of Josie's arms and darted forward like a wild rabbit. Her small hands latched onto Royce's wrist, the one holding the gun, and bit down hard. Royce screamed. Clara twisted away, elbowing his ribs. The derringer fired a wild shot into the dirt. Eloise fired a split second later. The bullet grazed Royce's shoulder, spinning him off balance. Clara shoved him, and he fell to the ground, and the weapon knocked from his hand. Blood soaked through his sleeve. The grooms froze. Callahan's sword turned toward Collins and fired. The shot missed, but just barely. It clipped the edge of Collins' coat and knocked him sideways. He rolled one-armed into a crouch, gun drawn. Drop it, Merrick, Collins said, or I swear I'll finish what the canyon didn't. Callahan hesitated, eyes flicking between Royce, groaning in the dirt, and the three girls now huddled together. His advantage was gone. His men were either disarmed or fleeing. He didn't drop his gun, but he didn't fire either. Instead, he sneered. You don't have the guts, Collins. Collins stepped closer. You really want to gamble your life on that? For a moment, the entire square held its breath. And then from the edge of town, a whistle rang out, shrill and sharp. 3 riders galloped in from the north, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Real marshals. Deputy Collins' backup delayed, but not too late. Their rifles were raised. Their badges shone in the afternoon sun. Callahan's sneer died. He dropped his gun. Collins kicked it aside and holstered his own. Sheriff Merrick Callahan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, aiding in human trafficking, and attempted murder. He turned to Royce. And you, for every scar on those girls, you'll answer for each one. Royce spat blood and tried to crawl away. Lila kicked dirt into his face. Eloise watched as shackles were placed on wrists once holding power. The grooms were rounded up. Deacon Moyer was cuffed mid-prayer. It should have felt like victory. But she didn't feel anything yet. Not joy, not relief, only the ache of what almost happened. She knelt beside Clara, who was shaking but still standing. You were brave, Eloise whispered. All of you. Lila, still holding her bitten hand like a badge of honor, looked up. Does this mean? It's over. Eloise looked around. At the broken gun, at the blood in the dirt, at the girls clinging to each other like wreckage survivors. "No," she said softly, "but it means we get to start again." The sun was slipping low, casting long shadows over the street where justice had finally started to take root. Deputy Collins limped toward the newly arrived marshals, passing them the journal and ledger. His voice was tired but resolute. "Get this to Judge Whitaker in Sweetwater." "Tonight." One marshal nodded, spurred his horse, and galloped back the way they came. Callahan and Royce sat cuffed on the ground, glaring at the dirt like it had betrayed them. Their silence wasn't guilt. It was calculation. Even in chains, they were searching for a crack in the walls closing in. Eloise saw it. She felt it the same way a mother feels a storm before it breaks. She pulled Collins aside. "They're not done," she said. "Royce still thinks he can escape. And Callahan's the kind of man who'd burn everything down before letting go." Collins nodded grimly. "I know, but the real danger wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. Inside the courthouse. Inside the system. Inside every man who'd looked the other way and still wore a badge or a collar or a nameplate on their desk." One of the grooms, Vernon Tate, began shouting. "I didn't know about the girls missing. I just paid for a wife, that's all I didn't do. No killing." Clara flinched. Eloise turned toward him. "You paid to own a child," she said, calm but cutting. "That's all the truth you need to know." Vernon shut up. The girls were quiet, gathered near the edge of the square where the dust had begun to settle. Their dresses were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and dried tears. But there was something new in their eyes now, not fear, not yet peace, but space. A space where healing might someday grow. That night, Eloise stayed awake on the porch of the town's boarding house. Collins sat beside her arm in a sling face drawn. "You did it," he said finally. "You brought light to a place that forgot what it looked like." Eloise didn't answer right away. She was staring at the girls through the window. Clara brushing Lila's hair, Josie folding the borrowed blanket into a neat square. There was care in their movements. Fragile hope. "It cost something," she said at last, "but some things are worth the price." Collins leaned forward. "There's a judge 2 towns over. He's honest, quiet but fair. If you're willing, I'll file guardianship papers for you." Eloise raised an eyebrow. "For all 3, that's the idea." She nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. They know that. But they still look at you like you're a reason to believe in tomorrow." Eloise felt something break and settle inside her like a lock turning after years of rust. The next morning, they stood outside the jailhouse. The 3 girls had changed into simple riding clothes. The wedding dresses had been folded and placed in a burlap sack. Eloise took the sack and handed it to one of the marshals. "Burn them," she said. "Let the wind carry the ashes where they can't hurt anyone again." The marshal nodded. Royce was loaded into the wagon, shackles clinking. Callahan followed, face expressionless. Vernon and the others trailed behind, smaller now, stripped of their power. Before they departed, Clara turned to Eloise. "What if they come back?" Eloise placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we fight again. But this time we fight together." Clara nodded. She wasn't a child anymore. None of them were. They rode north that afternoon, toward a ranch that needed mending, toward a life that still had holes, but also had room for light, toward a second chance. 6 months later, laughter echoed across a quiet stretch of land 50 miles north of where it all began. The ranch wasn't much, a small cabin patched with new boards, a broken fence slowly being mended, a handful of cattle grazing under a cottonwood tree. But it was theirs. Eloise stood on the porch hands, dusted with flour, watching 3 young girls run across the yard. Clara was chasing Lila, who held a piece of stolen bread like a trophy. Josie was already at the chicken coop, pretending to be stern, but smiling anyway. The sun was warm on Eloise's face. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like permission. Inside the house, a letter sat open on the table. It was from Deputy Collins. Royce Hanley had been sentenced to 25 years in territorial prison. Sheriff Callahan's corruption ring had collapsed with over a dozen others arrested. 14 missing girls had been found shaken, but safe. At the bottom of the page, Collins had scrawled something more personal. If you ever want to wear a real badge, the governor would be proud to give you one. Eloise smiled at the thought, then folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the family Bible. No, she didn't need a badge. She had a porch full of children, a life that mattered, and 3 girls who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. That evening, as stars blinked to life across a velvet sky, the 4 of them sat together on the porch steps, shoulders touching, breaths easy. Josie rested her head on Eloise's arm. Clara held a mug of tea with both hands. Lila fell asleep with a biscuit in her lap. There were still hard days. There would always be. But healing doesn't ask for perfection. Only persistence. Only love. In the barn, the wedding dresses had been torn into rags and used to clean the stalls. There was something poetic in that, something defiant. Those garments had once been symbols of ownership. Now they were just cloth. And the girls were free. If you've made it this far, maybe something in this story reached a part of you, the part that remembers how long it takes to heal and how powerful a simple act of defiance can be. If that's you, we'd be honored to have you stay a while. Subscribe to Healing Wild West Stories, where we tell tales that remember the forgotten and remind the world that courage doesn't always wear a gun. Sometimes it wears an apron, sometimes it walks with a limp, and sometimes it just stands between a child and a monster and says, "No more."